Hello and welcome. Welcome to another edition of Sales TV Live. Today, we're unlocking the hidden value of sales. We're joined by Juan Elias, sales leader and author of the book From Strategy to Revenue, Turning GTM Planning, Sales Execution, and Enablement into Measurable Growth. Juan has spent more than 20 years leading sales and revenue operations teams across major global organizations. And now Juan helps organizations connect strategy with execution, proving that when collaboration is done right, sales becomes the engine of business growth. Juan, welcome.
Hi, Rob. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
Great to have you. Thank you. Juan, I want to jump right into it. What do you mean when you say collaboration is the silver bullet in sales?
Well, let's talk about that complexity that defines most of the sales motions that we have today. And just for the sake of context, I'm thinking mostly in an enterprise like of a motion, right? So there's a lot of people that are on both the selling side and the buying side, right? Either and everyone brings something from a technical support perspective on the selling side, and even a shared decision making authority on the buying side. And at the very least, all of that requires coordination, which translates in the need of all of those agents and people and stakeholders collaborating amongst themselves. And I think sales plays a crucial role in terms of being that collaborator, facilitator, or the quarterback, if you allow me the term, to hurdle all those cats and get them to a successful outcome that hopefully is a win-win for both of the sides of the equation.
Excellent. So, what is the hidden value of sales beyond revenue?
Yeah. So in my mind, revenue is really the outcome of what you get in really doing what you should be doing from a sales functional perspective. Now, I want to break down the answer to that question in two dimensions. As I mentioned earlier, there's value that relates to what the sales teams do internally to ensure that all of the firepower that organization has in terms of marketing, messaging, the product and the services that they bring to their customers, the customer support that they have, and everyone that needs to be part of that sales conversation is brought in at the right time and with the right role and clarity. And on the other side of that equation, and as another dimension, we really have that buying side of things, where hopefully there's a counterpart to that salesperson on the buying side that is doing some of that internal coordination, but the alignment and what is feeding the coordination itself required on the buying side is really what sales brings, which ultimately shapes the buying experience that group or that customer as an organization is going to have.
So, if that is the ideal, why do sales teams fail to capture the full business, the full impact of their activities for the business?
Well, that's a great question, and I would start by saying that is not necessarily the sales team's fault, so to speak.
Oh,
It can be, but there's an because of this complexity that we already defined. There's a number of things that need to be in place to ensure that those sales teams are set up for success, right? So if we start with the clarity on, okay, what are we selling, who are we selling to, what is differentiating us from our competitors, how big is our market, and then how that defines how we go about executing our sales motions in the shape of a sales process. What is it that those who are executing that process need to be successful in terms of content, messaging, tools that support what they do. When all of those boxes are checked, that's really where you can ensure that that clarity is in place for those who need to execute that, have everything they need. And more importantly, from an organizational perspective, that you can scale that and expect a degree of consistency in doing so. Now, when any of those components that I shared as examples are missing, that creates a void that usually is filled by the best intention of who needs to fill it. And most likely, those are part of the sales teams because they really need to, uh, you know, continue to manage the engagement with their customers, and the show must go on, so to speak. So that's really what eventually starts showing those cracks that might end up in some of those things failing, or I would say not going as originally intended in that strategic document that should answer all of those things that we just touched upon.
I think you've alluded to it, but can you give us some examples of how cross-functional collaboration will increase sales performance?
Definitely. So I would start with we behind the scenes collaboration, right? So the all of the things that I mentioned earlier in terms of the clarity of the strategy, how that shapes our operational expectations in terms of what we execute, how we execute, and what we bring in front of the customer, is requiring an army of people and functions to really land on everything that needs to happen to set those sales teams for success. So that's kind of an internal component of it. Now, when the show starts, right, and then that choreography of executing on that sales process, and you know starting engaging the customer, bringing people from our own side as sellers that probably have something to speak to in terms of the technical details of our solution, or really helping us going deeper into the discovery conversation that would allow us to really understand and prioritize what exactly defines value for that prospect or client. The master of ceremony that really orchestrates that is really that salesperson that is in front of that team, and that is that collaboration that yet needs to be orchestrated and managed, uh, provided that everything we discussed earlier is in place, so that there's clarity on what is the role that everyone's playing, what is it that they bring to the table, and what is it that they need to achieve in that intervention as they go on stage, so that that eventually sets up the momentum that that particular deal is going to require to land to that successful outcome of the commitment, really to choose us as vendors and invest whatever needs to be invested in that solution we are providing.
You mentioned value, and it brought to mind a couple of questions. Let me start with this one. How can sales leaders prove the strategic value of their function?
Oh, that's a very good question. So, first off, value is in the eyes of the beholder, right? So, really understanding that definition of value is, I would think, the starting point. And I would start with really the sales manager as a role itself, and what's the success of such role means for the organization you are in. I have my own definition for that, and I think it's pretty straightforward. But I see sales managers to be really the catalyzers and the amplifiers of the scalability and the consistency of the quality of execution in our organization. And why I say that is because they touch every rep, every deal, every day. And they have a very clear mission, which is really ensure that people are doing what they are supposed to. Again, going back to all of those definitions in terms of process, the way we want to engage, the messaging we want to bring in front of our customers, and anything in between. Then they need to help those people do what they're doing even better. And ultimately, they need to hold those people accountable for the results that they need to deliver when it comes to the revenue that you were citing earlier as the main definition or outcome of that value of sales. Now, sales managers can be that afterthought when it comes to having that clarity of their mission and being enabled accordingly, and they can be drawn into a lot of other things that may prevent them from doing that very basic job of inspecting, coaching, and holding people accountable. And by the way, some organizations also knowingly or unknowingly also do that with their frontline sellers, right? So in the same fashion of simply defining that mission of a sales manager, you could argue that the rep's mission is really to create, advance, and close deals. And many times we're bringing people from sales either to be part of these panel from HR just to check what is it that whatever the theme of the day looks like, or provide feedback on what customers are saying for marketing, and being a 2-day workshop. And I think I'm seeing your body language, and you can relate to many of those things, and that's all fine. But as organizationally and as leaders, we need to ensure that everything that prevents those two roles from doing the three things that we define for them already is really eroding that effectiveness or the full value that those people can bring and those roles can bring to the organization and the business. And it sounds very easy and very straightforward, but I would bet that you and I would come with a lot of real life examples when that is not necessarily the case. And there's a number of reasons for that. So, but again, it starts with the awareness that we have as leaders in terms of how we're allowing people to do their job, and how we're setting them up for success.
Makes sense. So, as I said, I wanted to pick up on that term value, and I heard you say value is in the eye of the beholder, ultimately,
Yeah.
buyer. So, in that situation where each buyer is different, each buyer's value is different, how do I reframe my sales team's metric from revenue to value when value seems that it could always be changing?
Yeah, I think what connects value with revenue in my mind is that definition of value that you're alluding to really is the conduit to eventually get to that outcome of revenue to be in place, right? So I think the short answer to your question is you need to ask what that definition of value is. And from an organizational perspective, if we are setting that sales process effectively, there should be a very specific stage, hopefully earlier in the process, where we are engaging in a conversation that is more about listening than telling, right? So that's where you will have that space to drill down and ask all of those questions that go into defining that value that you were saying on the buyer side. And most likely that should be or could be in the shape of pains that need to be addressed, business challenges that need to be fixed, and that should allow to set up that conversation as far as, hey, I listen to you, I know what you're going through, and I know how to help you, and this is how we're going to do it, type of thing, right? So in other words, that discovery, that understanding of the definition of value shapes, hopefully, that compelling proposal that's going to address that value definition and differentiate from your competition if they're not doing what you are.
Got it. Earlier, you made reference to enablement. Now, that's near and dear to my heart. I've spent a lot of time in enablement. And I also see that it's part of what's covered in your book. So, what is, in your opinion, what is the link between sales enablement and measurable growth?
Great question as well. And that's something that a lot of enablement teams also suffer when it comes to the clarity of their identity, right? But my point of view is really that enablement's job, first off, is to maximize that every rep in the organization achieves their quota. So that metric of how successful is the broader of the organization is really what I see the core metric for enablement, because that shows really the impact that they have. Now, that's easier said than done because there's a lot of things that go into that, right? So, but really the role of enablement, going back to your question, is really translating how the requirements of executing on the strategy of the organization shape what is that different roles need to be doing when, what are the skills that they need to do that, and what is really the tools and any supporting materials that they require to achieve those outcomes, and mapping all that in a way that then they can create any enablement program that allows to either build those skills in those people or check that those skills are actually happening at scale. And if I connect the dots with what I say earlier, that should happen in partnership with those sales leaders that are actually the main conduit to scale that enablement effort. And even sometimes even blocking the effort, because if they don't think that what they're getting is in the best interest of their teams, they will probably leave that aside. So there's a symbiotic relationship between the frontline sales leaders who really are the custodians of their teams, and in leading them, they're really driving that direction that gets into ultimately every customer interaction, and what's coming from that enablement function to help those teams be as effective as they could be. So if that, again, there's an internal value conversation in terms of shaping what is it that those teams need, and the ability for the enablement function to translate that into what they can deliver for them. If that loop is not happening, then enablement as a function risks being myopic to what really is needed in the field, and therefore not being appreciated, and hence providing value to that end in what they do.
So the collaboration between sales and sales enablement is pretty obvious, as you just mapped it there. What about the collaboration between sales and, say, product or marketing or customer success? How do I, as a sales leader, build collaboration between my sales team and those other departments? Or do I even want to?
I was about to ask you that very question. Do you really need that? Right? Uh, so, short answer is it depends. I mean, if you are in a smaller organization where there's more of a family-like and direct access to many of those stakeholders, which in many cases the function itself is defined as one person, you can have that direct access and get what you need from that function to inform that execution that we were discussing earlier. Now, as organizations grow, I think sales enablement takes that role of being the internal facilitator to going and getting from each of those functions the right messaging, the product specs, whatever that needs to be, and informing that, using that to inform all of those materials that they create to ensure that that content and that knowledge is captured in them and embedded into those enablement programs that hopefully are getting those teams to use that knowledge at the service of those outcomes that we want to achieve with our customers when they meet them.
Okay. Now, we've talked about value creation and collaboration, and we've said that, it's not about revenue, it's about the value, but at the end of the day, it is still about revenue. How do I embed collaboration into my sales process without bogging things down, without slowing them down to the point that I'm not delivering revenue?
Yeah, I would use the analogy of, well, no, it's not an analogy, it's a fact actually. Revenue is a lagging indicator, right? So what you ended up creating or sending an invoice to is ultimately the result of having done many of the things that need to have been done, so that commitment to pay for whatever you are selling is in place in the customer side, right? Now, to ensure that there's no wasted value in doing what needs to be done across the sales process, as you mentioned, I would go back to that clarity required in terms of defining what is it that we need to do to sell, anchored on how we think and know our customers are buying. So understanding that buying journey is a critical starting point to say, okay, if this is what the customer needs to make a decision that hopefully is going to demand our products and services, this is what we need to do as a counterpart of that to cater to all of those needs and those decisions to be made, right? So at the end of the day, sales is about facilitating that decision process, starting by building the trust that that we can be agents of that decision making process, and providing what it need is needed and required by those who have to make those decisions, which is a mindset in itself, right? So, and that is very different from getting in front of someone and start talking about how big and nice and great my product is, its color, its features, but more about, hey, I'm here to help you. Uh, I'm pretty sure that you may know who we are, and that information is all out there. But really, the way to put into service what we have to offer to best fit your needs is requiring that we have a conversation related to happening in your business, and what's the base to address that. So, back again to your question, when that clarity of how our buyers are buying, and having defined our sales motions around that, that defines then that there are different outcomes to be achieved throughout that process, right? From starting with agreeing that there's merit in us to continue a conversation in the early prospection phases in terms of, hey, this is what we do. I infer that you may be going through these particular problems because you fit this profile of customers that I've seen a lot, and I'm going to validate that hypothesis with you. If that's the case, then let's go in a deeper conversation. Let's go into more the weeds of what's happening. I may be bringing people that are going to have more technical questions related to that, and depending on the dimensions of what we're discussing, all the way to translating the outcome of that discovery conversation into what are the solutions that I have in my toolkit that are going to address which of those needs, and ultimately translating that into a proposal that hopefully has a value calculation that is measurable in terms of, hey, this is how we're impacting your business. This is how we're either accelerating, reducing costs, or making you, sell more or differentiate from your competition, and this is what we bring to that. And if all of that is done effectively, and everyone who was in need of joining that choreography did it at the right time, and perform as expected, that decision of buying from the customer side, it becomes really a natural conclusion of that evolving conversation that the sales process could be.
Juan, as we wrap up our time here, if you were to emphasize the one thing that you would want our audience to take away from today's episode, what would that one thing be?
Well, I would talk about that mindset where you are clear that you're not alone, right? And that should allow you to either foster or seek for that collaboration in whatever piece of that process you sit on, and ensure that you're aware of the role you play if you're leading that process in fostering that collaboration. And when you cannot answer what it takes to do that, that might be something that it should prompt a question internally for you to get to that clarity needed for you to play that role of the orchestrator that we just defined and discussed in these past 20 minutes.
Excellent. Juan, this has been great. Thank you so much. On behalf of everyone at Sales TV Live, to you and to our audience, thank you all for being an active part in today's conversation. If you like what you heard today, please take a moment to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Substack, or YouTube. Let us know what you learned and what you'd like to learn more about. Your feedback helps us reach more people like you and helps us fulfill our mission of elevating the profession of sales. Thank you all, and see you next time.
Thank you, Rob, for having me.
My pleasure. Thank
You'll
you.
have a good rest of the day.